Elena Cole gave her last dollar to a bleeding stranger at the corner of Fifth and Meridian, not knowing he was Dante Vitale, the most powerful Korean crime boss in Miami. She had exactly $34 in her possession and 48 hours before homelessness became absolute. The summer thunderstorm broke over Miami like a fist through glass, lightning splitting the purple sky, rain hammering the pavement so hard it bounced back up in silver needles. The overturned black Mercedes sat twisted against a lamppost, passenger door crumpled like aluminum foil, steam hissing from the engine in angry white clouds. The smell hit first, metallic and sharp, blood mixing with ozone and rain and the acrid burn of gasoline leaking onto wet asphalt. Elena stood in the downpour, her donated second-hand coat already soaked through, the fabric clinging to her ribs like a second skin. She was 31 years old but looked decades older, her dark hair plastered against her face, her eyes the color of storm clouds. She watched a man crawl through the shattered driver's window, and she did not recognize him. She had never seen Dante Vitale. She only saw someone dying. His hand reached for the lamppost, trembling, and she moved without thinking. The man was tall, 6'2" at least, with broad shoulders straining against a blood-soaked briny suit that cost more than everything Elena had owned in her entire life. Glass was embedded in his left cheekbone, running like a scar from his temple to his jaw. His breathing came wet and labored, his ribs heaving beneath the ruined silk. His eyes were dark, penetrating even through the fog of pain, and when he looked at her, something shifted in his expression. Recognition of what, she did not know. She knelt in the flooded gutter without hesitation. The water was cold, filthy with oil and debris, but she did not care. She offered her shoulder, and he took it, leaning his full weight against her. His expensive cologne, something Italian, something that probably cost $200 a bottle, cut through the smell of gasoline. She was small, 5'4", and he was heavy, but adrenaline made her strong. They stood like that for a moment, two strangers holding each other up in the rain. "Can you walk?" she whispered. He did not answer. Instead, he pulled something from his pocket with one shaking hand. A diamond-encrusted Patek Philippe watch, worth more than a year of her old salary. He stared at it as if seeing it for the first time, then thrust it back into his pocket. Elena reached into her coat with trembling fingers and pulled out her wallet, worn leather, held together with duct tape. Inside were bills. $34. All of it. Every dollar she had left before the eviction notice became real, before the streets claimed her, before she became invisible even to herself. The bills were damp from the rain. She looked at them for 1 second, one long, terrible second, and then she pressed them into his hand. "For a cab," she said. "For a phone call. Whatever you need." He stared at the money, then at her face. His eyes traced her features like he was committing her to memory, like she was a map he needed to memorize for survival. Something cold and dangerous stirred in his chest, but his expression remained unreadable. "What is your name?" His voice was deep and solid like an oath, accented in a way she could not place. "Elena." She helped him stand straighter, supporting his weight. "Elena Cole." He nodded slowly. "I will not forget this." The sound of sirens approached in the distance, growing louder, cutting through the sound of the rain. Red and blue lights reflected off the wet pavement, painting everything in alternating colors of blood and bruise. Elena heard the engines before she saw the vehicles, 3 black SUVs, sleek and predatory, pulling up to the crash site with precision that suggested practice. Doors opened. Men emerged. Not police. She knew the difference. These men wore suits that fit too well, moved with too much purpose, and their eyes held the cold calculation of people who solved problems with methods that did not involve paperwork. The man beside her tensed. His hand gripped her shoulder hard enough to hurt. "Do not let go," he said quietly. But before Elena could respond, before she could ask what was happening or why these men were looking at them with such intensity, another vehicle arrived. This one was different, white with official markings. Actual police. The suited men retreated slightly, their body language shifting from predators to something more careful, more guarded. They spoke into earpieces, communicating with voices so low Elena could not hear them. One of the suited men approached. He was tall and broad, with a scar running from his right eye to his cheekbone, his face arranged in an expression of controlled fury. When he spoke, his voice was careful, respectful, but underneath it ran something that sounded like devotion. "Boss. We need to move. Now." The man beside Elena, Dante, though she did not yet know his name, released her shoulder. He stepped back, and the space between them felt suddenly vast, suddenly impossible. He looked at her one more time, and his eyes held something she could not name. Regret, perhaps. Or the beginning of an obsession. "Elena Cole," he said, and hearing her name in his mouth felt like a curse being spoken. "You will be safe. I will make certain of it." Then he turned, and the men surrounded him, and they moved toward one of the black SUVs with the fluid grace of people who had rehearsed this choreography 1,000 times. The vehicle's door closed. The engine started. Within seconds, they were gone, leaving Elena standing alone in the rain with $34 that no longer existed in her pocket and a promise that sounded like a threat wrapped in silk. The police arrived moments later, their uniforms soaked immediately by the downpour. They asked her questions, but Elena had nothing to tell them. She had seen an accident. She had helped a stranger. She had given him money because she knew what it meant to be desperate. The police seemed disappointed by her uselessness. They took a statement, got her name and a phone number that would never ring, and sent her on her way. Elena walked home through the Miami heat and rain, her clothes clinging to her skin, her body shaking with cold or shock or both. The streets at midnight were empty except for the occasional car passing through the downpour. She counted her steps. 2,000 steps to her apartment. 2,000 steps back to the place she would soon be forced to leave. She did not know that she had just given her last dollar to the most dangerous man in Miami. She did not know that mercy could be a weapon. She did not know that Dante Vitale never forgot a face, never forgot a debt, and she had just signed her name across the most dangerous ledger in the city. But what changed everything was what happened 3 weeks earlier, on a Tuesday morning when the mail arrived, when her brother Marcus appeared at her door with a smile that did not reach his eyes and a piece of paper that would destroy everything. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you do not miss what is coming tomorrow. Now let us go back to the beginning, to 3 weeks before the storm, to the moment when Elena Cole still had a roof over her head and did not yet know that the cost of kindness would be measured in everything she owned. 3 weeks earlier, the eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday. Elena was preparing lunch for the 42 residents of Sunrise Manor, the assisted living facility where she worked double shifts, 6 days a week, for $9.50 per hour. The kitchen was small and hot, the air thick with the smell of boiling vegetables and institutional soup base. She stood at the stove stirring a pot of something that might have been chicken and might have been chicken-flavored cardboard. At this point, she could not tell the difference. Her hands were raw from the cleaning chemicals, her fingernails broken and stained yellow, her back aching from standing since 5 in the morning. The mail came at noon. She saw the envelope sitting on the counter, hand-delivered, sealed with red ink stamped across it in letters that screamed final notice. Elena recognized the handwriting before she opened it. Her brother Marcus. Her older brother, who had inherited their father's real estate empire along with his cruelty. The letter was short and to the point. 12 days. She had 12 days to vacate the penthouse apartment he owned, the place she had called home for 6 years, the place she had rebuilt her life after everything fell apart. The reason was not stated clearly, but she understood it anyway. Marcus had been pressuring her for months to become his business partner in ways that had nothing to do with business. When she refused, when she told him that what he was asking was wrong and that she would never agree, something cold and dark had settled into his eyes. This eviction was his response. This was his punishment for her refusal. Elena set down the wooden spoon and sat on the floor of the kitchen, right there beside the industrial dishwasher, and she let herself shake. The tears did not come. Her tears had dried up somewhere on a Greyhound bus years ago, and they had not returned since. Instead, she sat in silence, counting the hours until her shift ended, counting the money in her account, $347.92, and understanding with perfect clarity that she was going to be homeless in 12 days. She did not tell anyone. She worked through the rest of her shift, served lunch to the elderly residents who called her dear and sweetheart and told her she was too good for this place, and then she went home to her penthouse apartment, which was not really a penthouse at all but a converted storage room on the roof of a building in Little Havana. The walls were thin enough to hear her neighbor's television through them. The window faced an alley. The rent was free because her brother owned it, and he had let her live there as long as she remained available for the things he wanted. That had changed when she said no. Elena sat on the edge of her bed and looked at the eviction notice. 12 days. By July 15th, she would need to have vacated the premises entirely. She would need to find somewhere to go, somewhere to live, somewhere to be that was not here. She had $347.92 and a job that paid $9.50 per hour. The math was simple. The math was impossible. She pulled out her phone and called the only person who might help. Her best friend Vivian, who worked as a nurse at Jackson Memorial Hospital and had offered 100 times to help Elena with money or housing or whatever she needed. Vivian answered on the second ring. Elena. Hi. What is wrong? You sound like someone just told you something terrible. My brother gave me an eviction notice, Elena said, and her voice did not crack because she had learned not to let it crack. 12 days. I need to leave the apartment. There was silence on the other end of the line, then a long exhale. Come stay with me. Right now. Pack a bag and come stay with me. We will figure this out. We always figure things out. But Elena could not do that. Could not impose on Vivian, who had her own problems, her own medical school debt, her own struggles. Elena had learned early in life that the best way to protect people you loved was to keep your problems away from them. Instead, she said, I will be fine. I will find something. It was a lie, and they both knew it was a lie, but Vivian knew better than to push. She knew Elena the way only someone who had known her since childhood could know her. She knew that Elena would rather starve than accept help, that Elena had built walls so high and so thick that even kindness could not penetrate them. After they hung up, Elena counted her money again. $347. She had 7 more days of work that week. That would bring in approximately $270, minus taxes. She would have $617 to her name. Rent for a room, even in the worst neighborhoods, started at $600 per month. She would not even have a deposit. She lay on her bed and listened to the rain begin to fall outside her window, and she understood with complete certainty that her life was ending. Not in the dramatic sense, not in a way that would make the news or move people to tears. Her life was ending in the way that thousands of lives ended every day in cities like Miami, quietly, invisibly, with no one to witness it except herself. She did not know that someone was watching her. She did not know that in a high-rise downtown, in an office on the 42nd floor, Dante Vitale was beginning to learn about the woman who had helped his driver escape an ambush, the woman who had given him money when she had nothing, the woman whose name was Elena Cole. 3 weeks before that thunderstorm, before the overturned car, before Elena Cole would give away her last dollar to a stranger, her entire world fit inside a room the size of a closet. 8 feet by 5 feet. A twin mattress on the floor with sheets she had washed 100 times until the fabric grew thin as paper. Her clothes hung from a metal rod screwed directly into the wall, 5 pairs of pants, 3 shirts, 2 dresses, 1 cardigan with a button missing. A battery-powered lamp sat on an upside-down crate because there was no electrical outlet in the converted storage space where she slept. This was her room in the Harrington house in Coral Gables. This was her entire life contained. She woke every morning at 5:30, before the twins, before the household stirred to life. Elena would lie still for a moment in the darkness, listening to the house breathe around her, and then she would rise and dress in the quiet. The mattress never fully supported her weight. Her back ached in the mornings, a dull throb that would fade by noon, only to return when she lay down again at night. The Harringtons paid her $900 a month plus room and board. Room and board. Those words meant something different when your room was the size of a closet and your meals consisted of their leftovers, reheated on a hot plate she kept hidden under the sink because Mrs. Harrington did not permit cooking in the servant spaces. Elena had been working there for 2 years. 2 years of waking in darkness, of dressing quietly, of moving through the house like a ghost that no one acknowledged except when they needed something. For 2 years, she had saved everything. She set aside money from every paycheck, every gift from the twins' grandparents that she convinced them to give her instead of toys, every dollar she could possibly spare. She hid it in a coffee can, pushed far beneath her mattress where no one would find it. $4,200. That was her entire escape plan. $4,200 between her and complete dissolution. The twins were 6 years old, identical except for a small strawberry mark on Lily's left shoulder. They had learned to read because Elena taught them on the living room floor every afternoon at 3 o'clock when their mother was at her Pilates class and the house belonged to them alone. The girls would sit on either side of her, their small hands gripping picture books with laminated covers, their voices high and uncertain as they sounded out words. Cat. Dog. Home. Sun. Miss Elena, what is this word? Lily would ask, pointing at something she could not pronounce. Elena would take the book gently and show them. She loved these moments with a fierceness that terrified her. She had learned early in life that loving things too much meant losing them, and so she held this love carefully, like a candle in the wind, knowing it could be extinguished at any moment. What changed everything was a Tuesday afternoon in the 3rd week of April. Elena was at the park with the twins when her phone rang. The number was the house. She answered to the voice of their housekeeper, Maria, speaking in rapid Spanish, then switching to English, her voice high and panicked. Fire. The house is on fire. You must come home now. The drive took 6 minutes. 6 minutes of her hands shaking on the steering wheel, of the twins asking questions she could not answer. When she turned onto Palmetto Drive, she saw the smoke first, black and thick, pouring from the second-floor window like a living thing. Her room. That was exactly where her room was located. The fire trucks blocked the driveway. Firefighters moved with controlled urgency, their equipment catching the afternoon sun. Elena pulled to the curb 3 houses down and stepped out of the car. The heat hit her face even from that distance, a wall of warmth that made her skin prickle. You need to stay back, one of the firefighters said, his hand on her shoulder. My room is in there, Elena said. Everything I own is in that house. He did not move his hand. His expression did not change. Nothing is getting salvaged from that section. You need to move back. She watched the flames climb higher, licking at the roof, consuming the room where she slept, where she had hidden her coffee can, where she had spent the last 2 years of her life preparing for something better. The room where her parents' photographs hung in frames on the wall. 3 photographs. That was all she had left of them after her childhood home burned down when she was 17. And now those photographs were burning again. The twins held her hands. Their fingers were small and warm. They did not understand what they were watching. They only knew that Miss Elena's hands were shaking and her face had gone very still. Mrs. Harrington arrived 40 minutes later, her blonde hair pulled back in a pearl-clasped clip, her designer sunglasses pushed up on her forehead. She stepped out of her white Range Rover and looked at the smoking house, then at Elena. The expression that crossed her face was not shock or concern. It was calculation. The house is a total loss, she said flatly. At least the structure is insured. You, however, are not insured. Elena's mouth was dry. Mrs. Harrington, the renovation will take months. I cannot afford to keep you on staff when there is no household to run. You are released from your position, effective immediately. Elena felt something inside her chest collapse like a building imploding. But my savings. I left my savings in my room. In a can under the mattress. The firefighters said. Mrs. Harrington's face hardened into something sharp and unmerciful. You were paid fairly for your work. I am not responsible for your poor financial planning. The fact that you kept cash in a closet instead of in a bank is not my concern." The words landed like bullets. Elena had no response. She had been saving that money in cash specifically because she had no identification, no social security number, no way to open a bank account. She had been paid under the table for 2 years. She had been invisible by necessity. "I will need you gone within the hour," Mrs. Harrington continued. She reached into her purse and removed a check, signed it with precise movements, and handed it to Elena. "This is your final payment. You should consider yourself fortunate. $34. Elena looked at the check in her hand. $34 stood between her and homelessness. She could feel the twins' eyes on her. She did not look at them. She could not look at them. "Goodbye, Elena," Mrs. Harrington said. It was not a farewell. It was a dismissal. Elena left in the clothes she was wearing and the borrowed jacket that belonged to the twins. That was all she could take. She walked through the neighborhood with no destination, no plan, only the knowledge that her life had just ended in a way that would not make the news or move people to tears. It would end quietly, the way thousands of lives ended every day in cities like Miami. Invisibly. Without witness. She found herself standing outside a glass office building in Little Havana as the sun descended toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the street. She had been there once before, 3 months ago, when desperation first began its slow whisper at the edges of her life. The directory listed his name on the 7th floor. Marcus Webb. Developments and Real Estate. She took the elevator up. Her hands were steady, but inside her chest, something had already begun to splinter. The office was all cream-colored leather and dark wood, cool air conditioning that made her borrowed jacket feel inadequate. A secretary looked up from her desk with an expression of faint distaste, as if Elena's poverty was something that could be caught. "I need to speak with Mr. Webb," Elena said. The secretary hesitated, but something in Elena's voice, something flat and final, made her pick up the phone. 2 minutes later, the inner office door opened, and Marcus Webb stepped out. He was 52 years old, though he carried his age differently than most men. His hair was dark, graying at the temples in a way that was probably expensive to maintain. His suit was charcoal gray, tailored so precisely that the seams looked like they had been drawn by an architect. A gold Rolex caught the light on his left wrist. He had the kind of face that suggested he had never been told no about anything. He studied Elena for a long moment, and his expression shifted from professional courtesy to something else entirely. Recognition, perhaps. Or hunger. "Miss Cole," he said, the name rolling off his tongue with deliberate slowness. "It has been some time." 3 months. He remembered. Of course he remembered. Men like Marcus Webb remembered every rejection because they received so few. "I need an apartment," Elena said. There was no point in negotiation. There was nothing she could negotiate with except the one thing she had already refused to give. Marcus gestured her into his office. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Little Havana, the streets beginning to glow with evening neon. He settled into his leather chair and slid a lease across the desk without looking at a computer, without any paperwork at all. As if he already knew what he was going to offer her. 4th floor of my Meridian Street building. 400 square feet. $750 a month. Available immediately. Elena looked at the lease. The terms were written in her name. It was real. It was possible. She could afford exactly 1 month of rent. After that, she would have nothing. "I will take it," she said. Marcus smiled, and it was not a kind expression. "I thought you might. Welcome to your new home, Miss Cole." She did not know that Marcus Webb had not forgotten her rejection 3 months ago. She did not know that her name had come up in a conversation between siblings, between her potential landlord and his sister Cordelia, who had recently married into the Blackwood family and who had recently been asked to arrange for a woman to disappear, a woman who was becoming a distraction to a man named Dante Vitale, a man who ran an empire built on silence and loyalty and carefully calibrated violence. She did not know any of this as she signed the lease with a pen Marcus handed her, its weight solid and expensive in her shaking hand. She only knew that she had a place to sleep tomorrow night. That was enough. That was all she had. The summer thunderstorm arrived without warning, the sky splitting open like a wound. Rain came sideways, cold and violent after hours of suffocating Miami heat. Elena Cole walked through it without an umbrella because she could not afford one. The eviction notice sat on her apartment counter, 12 days stamped in red ink like a countdown to erasure. She had $34 left. The rain soaked through her borrowed jacket as she hurried toward the corner food bank on Fifth and Meridian. It would close in 20 minutes. 20 minutes to get there, wait in line, take whatever they had left. Canned beans, maybe. Rice. Something to stretch another week if the eviction could somehow be delayed, if Marcus Webb could somehow be reasoned with, if the universe could somehow decide she mattered enough to let her live. The sky flashed white. Thunder followed so close the sound hit her chest like a physical blow. That was when she heard the crash. The black Mercedes flipped, twisted, metal screaming against asphalt. It hit the lamppost at an angle that defied physics, glass exploding outward in a glittering shower. The car came to rest on its side, hood crumpled, smoke rising from the engine. Elena's survival instincts, honed by 3 years of poverty and loss, should have told her to keep walking. Should have told her to protect the $34 in her pocket, to guard her energy, to not get involved. But she saw movement inside the wreckage. A hand pressing against the shattered window. She ran. The driver's side door was jammed. Elena pulled at it with both hands, rain streaming down her face, her borrowed shoes slipping on the wet pavement. The door did not budge. She moved to the passenger window, smashed the remaining glass away with a piece of the bumper, reached inside. A man's hand grabbed hers. Warm. Bleeding. She pulled. He pushed. For a moment that stretched into eternity, they worked together against the twisted metal and gravity and fate itself. Then he was sliding through the window, falling into her arms, his full weight surprising her, driving her backward into the rain-slicked street. He was tall. Korean features, sharp and aristocratic even in pain. Dark suit worth more than everything she owned, now soaked in blood from a gash across his cheekbone. His eyes were the color of storm clouds. "Can you stand?" she asked. He tried. His left leg buckled. She caught him, steadied him against the lamppost, her 5'3" frame barely supporting his weight. Up close, she could see the careful control in his movements, the way even injured and disoriented he moved like a man used to command. "We need to get you to a hospital," she said. A car was approaching. Elena stepped into the street, waving her arms. A teenager in a Honda Civic slowed, then stopped, window rolling down. The boy's eyes went wide when he saw the crash, the blood, the man collapsing against the lamppost. "I will pay you to take him to St. Mary's," Elena said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her wallet. It contained 3 20s, 5 1s, and $4 in coins. $34. Everything. She handed the teenager all of it. The boy stared at the money. "That is all the cash I have," Elena said. "Please." "He needs help." Something in her voice made the teenager nod. He got out, helped Elena move the man into the back seat. The injured man's eyes found hers one last time before the door closed. "Your name," he said. His voice was rough, accented. His accent threaded through English like silk through darkness. "Elena Cole." He nodded once, then the car pulled away into the rain, disappearing around the corner. Elena stood in the middle of Fifth and Meridian, soaked through, empty-handed, the eviction notice waiting in her apartment like a guillotine blade. But what she did not realize was that the man she had just saved was named Dante Vitale, and that before the teenager's Honda had driven 3 blocks, he had sent a single text message to a lieutenant named Marco. The message contained only 2 words, "Find her?" For days later, Elena was sitting outside a corner store on Brickell Avenue when the black SUV pulled up. She had been evicted that morning. The marshals had given her 10 minutes to collect her belongings. She had left with 2 borrowed outfits in a garbage bag and the clothes on her back. The first night she slept in a park, the second night under an overpass. By the third day, she was invisible, which was what homelessness did to a person. It made you see-through, made people's eyes slide past you without catching. She was counting the $17 left from a food pantry when the SUV's doors opened. 2 men in suits stepped out. One was tall, scar running across his jaw like a map of violence. The other was shorter, wore wire-framed glasses, looked like an accountant. They were Marco and Theo. They were Dante Vitale's lieutenants. She did not know this. Elena Cole, the scarred one, asked. She looked up, defensive. "Who is asking?" "We work for someone you helped," Marco said. His voice was flat, professional, the way people speak when they have been taught that emotion is a liability. "He wants to see you." "I do not know what you are talking about." Theo pulled out his phone. He showed her a photograph, a man in the rain, bleeding, her face visible as she helped him stand. "The man from the storm." "He is alive because of you," Marco said. "Get in the car." She refused. "I am not getting in a car with strange men." Marco sighed. He pulled an envelope from his jacket, handed it to her. Inside was $500 in 20s and a handwritten note on cardstock so expensive it felt like silk. It said only, "Thank you. Let me return the favor." An address below. "Why?" she asked. Theo spoke for the first time. His voice was gentler than Marco's, but no less dangerous. "Because he does not forget debts. The address is a restaurant. Noon tomorrow. He will explain everything." They walked back to the SUV and drove away. Elena sat with $500 in her shaking hands and no comprehension of what she had stepped into. The next day at noon, she entered Lombardi's, an upscale restaurant in Wynwood with white tablecloths and waiters in pressed vests. Her borrowed outfit was clean but threadbare. She still smelled like the street. The Metro took one look at her and started to turn her away. Then Marco appeared from a back hallway. "She is expected." The Metrod's face went pale. He led her to a private booth, frosted glass panels providing privacy, a single candle burning on the table. Dante Vitale sat reading a leather-bound menu. He looked different than he had in the rain, hair combed back, tailored black suit, a single bandage on his cheekbone from the glass. Late 30s. Handsome in a way that suggested danger was part of his attractiveness. He stood when she approached. "Please," he said. "Sit." She sat on the edge of the booth, ready to flee. "Why am I here?" she asked. Dante folded his hands on the table. "You gave me $34. I checked. It was everything you had. You helped a stranger when you had nothing to give." His eye searched hers. "I want to know why." "Because it was the right thing to do," Elena said. Something flickered across his face, recognition, maybe, or surprise. "I know you were evicted. I know Marcus Webb owns your building. I know you have $17 left." Her head snapped up. "How do you know that?" "I have people who find out things." He did not smile. "I am offering you a job. My son needs a nanny. For $1,000 a month, plus a private room in my home, plus benefits." Elena stared at him. "That is impossible." "Why would you pay that much?" "Because my son is worth it. And because you are not nobody, Elena Cole." The words landed like grace. She wanted to refuse. It sounded too good. Too dangerous. But she had nowhere to sleep tonight. "What happened to his mother?" she asked. Dante's jaw tightened. "She died. 3 years ago. Childbirth. Our daughter did not survive either." His voice went hollow. "I cannot go into the nursery." Elena saw the grief, raw and unhealed despite 3 years passing. She made her decision. "I will meet him first. If he likes me, I will stay. Dante nodded once. That evening at his estate in Pinecrest, Marco drove Elena through iron gates into a world she did not know existed. The house was massive, all marble and glass, overlooking manicured gardens. Rosa, the housekeeper, showed her to a private suite bigger than any apartment Elena had ever lived in. But at dinner, while Elena sat across from Dante and a shy 6-year-old boy named Noah, Cordelia Blackwood arrived unannounced. She was beautiful in a cruel way, blonde hair perfectly styled, designer clothes that probably cost more than Elena's total lifetime earnings. She was Dante's late wife's cousin, and she looked at Elena the way a predator looks at wounded prey. "So you are the charity case," Cordelia said, leaning against the doorframe. Her smile was sharp as broken glass. "I have known Dante for 15 years. I knew his wife. I know his world." She paused. "Do you really think you belong here?" Elena met her eyes but did not answer. That night, Elena helped Noah with his bath. He was small for 6, serious-eyed, watching her with an intensity that made her understand he had learned early not to trust easily. When she tucked him into bed, he asked a question that broke something inside her. "Will you leave too?" "I am not going anywhere," Elena said. "I promise." In the darkness down the hallway, Dante stood listening to his son's breathing finally slow into sleep. Marco appeared beside him, and Dante spoke so quietly Marco almost missed it. "In 15 years, I have never let anyone close to him." "I know," Marco said. She gave him her hand at the park. He held it the entire way home. Marco said nothing. There was nothing to say. They both understood what it meant when the boy who had not trusted anyone in 3 years chose to trust this woman. But in a corner office in downtown Miami, Marcus Webb was making a phone call. His voice was low, urgent. "My nephew Julian needs this done. He wants Dante Vitale vulnerable, and the woman is the key." And Cordelia Blackwood, in her penthouse apartment overlooking Biscayne Bay, was composing an email to a journalist she knew. Subject line: Mafia Connection Scandal. The words she typed were designed to destroy, to humiliate, to tear down everything Dante had built. The rain had stopped. The sky was clearing. But the real storm was only beginning. 2 months had passed since the night of the thunderstorm, and Elena Cole stood in the garden behind Dante Vitale's Miami estate at 2 in the morning, rain soaking through her shirt, her hands trembling. The sky was breaking open again, lightning splitting clouds the color of bruises, and she could taste the salt of the bay mixed with her own tears. Noah's drawing was folded in her pocket, crayon figures labeled in a child's careful handwriting: me, Dad, and Miss Elena. A family. But families could be destroyed. That was what she had learned in the last 12 hours. Marcus Webb had cornered her outside Noah's school during pickup. His breath smelled like whiskey and failure. His fingers dug into her arm, pulling her behind the brick building where no one could see. "You think you won?" His voice was raw, desperate. "You think Dante Vitale gives a damn about you? Julian is going to kill him. When he does, you will have nothing again. I am going to make sure you end up in the gutter where you belong." She had jerked free, her skin burning where he had grabbed her, and run to Noah. The boy had seen her face and gone quiet the way children do when they understand something terrible is happening. She had called Marco. He arrived in 3 minutes, took in her shaking hands, her pale face, the red marks on her arm, and his jaw had gone tight like a blade wrapped in ice. Marcus was already gone, melted back into Miami's underbelly, but the threat had landed. It was real. It was coming. Then came Cordelia Blackwood's charity gala. The Blackwood estate glittered with money and malice. Dante had been invited to the event, a power display among the wealthy, and he had brought Elena as Noah's caretaker since they maintained the pretense of propriety. She wore a dress Rosa had insisted on, navy silk, elegant, a fabric she had never felt before. But when Cordelia saw her, everything changed. The ballroom was full. Crystal chandeliers cast light like diamonds across the pale marble floor. And Cordelia Blackwood, 63 years old, dressed in white that made her look like an avenging angel, had smiled and spoken loud enough for everyone to hear. "Everyone, this is Elena Cole. She is Dante's new nanny." The word hung in the air like poison. Laughter rippled through the crowd, cruel and cutting. Though I am sure we all know what that really means. She was homeless, you know. Evicted. Dante picked her up off the street. Literally. How charitable of him. A woman in diamonds leaned toward her companion and whispered, but not quietly enough. "I heard she seduced him for money." Another woman nodded, her voice dripping with contempt. "Using the poor dead wife's son as bait. Shameless." Elena felt the room spinning, felt every eye on her like fingers pressing down. She stood frozen, humiliated, her hands clenched at her sides. And then Dante appeared beside her. His presence was like the sudden stillness before thunder. His voice when he spoke was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute command. "Cordelia. You will apologize." Cordelia's smile did not waver. "For what?" "Telling the truth." Dante's hand found Elena's and squeezed once. The contact grounded her, reminded her she was not alone. "We are leaving." As they walked toward the doors, their footsteps echoing across the marble, Cordelia called after them. Her voice was light, almost playful, but the words were a knife. "You cannot protect her forever, Dante. Julian will make sure of that." Now Elena stood in the garden at 2 in the morning, and the threat felt like a rope around her throat. 2 months of stolen moments, of Dante watching her read to Noah with an expression unguarded and almost vulnerable, of late-night conversations in the hallway where they talked about grief and survival until dawn broke pink across the sky. 2 months of falling in love with a man who had not touched her, had not crossed a line, but whose presence had become like oxygen. And now the weight of that love felt like it could destroy him. She thought about leaving. It would be easier. Safer. She could disappear, go to another city, start over with her rebuilt savings. Dante would be safer without her. Noah would forget her eventually. The rain intensified, cold against her skin, and she pulled out her phone with shaking fingers. She typed a resignation text, "I cannot stay. I am sorry. It is better for you this way." Her finger hovered over send. Lightning cracked the sky open, and in that white-hot moment, she saw the drawing again. Not the phone, but the drawing in her pocket. The crayon figures. The child's handwriting. A family that did not exist yet, but that she wanted with a desperation that frightened her. She deleted the text. She was not running. Not anymore. Meanwhile, in his office on the 42nd floor of the Vitale building downtown, Dante Vitale was examining the evidence Marco had compiled. Photographs. Financial records. Recorded phone calls. Everything they needed to understand the conspiracy that had been building against him for months. Julian Cross was Cordelia's nephew from her first marriage, a spoiled trust fund criminal who believed he could take over Dante's territory by destroying him from the inside. Marcus Webb had been taking Julian's money to sabotage Dante, to make him vulnerable. And Cordelia, beautiful, refined, sophisticated Cordelia, had been feeding information to Julian about Dante's movements, his schedule, his connection to Elena. She had been coordinating the attack with the precision of someone who understood exactly how to wound. Marco stood beside Dante's desk, his expression grim. Theo was there too, the numbers analyst, holding a folder thick with financial crimes. Dante listened to everything in silence, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, his dark eyes burning like coals. "They threatened my son's nanny," Dante said finally. His voice was level, controlled, but Marco felt ice slide down his spine. "They tried to use her to hurt my family. That ends tonight." At dawn, the FBI moved. Federal agents in tactical gear surrounded Julian Cross's penthouse in Brickland. The battering ram struck the door with a sound like thunder. Flashbangs detonated. Shouting. Julian was dragged from bed in silk pajamas, screaming about lawyers and rights and money. Agent Victoria Reyes, who had been building a RICO case against him for 2 years with information Dante had been feeding her anonymously, read him his rights with the satisfaction of someone who had finally captured what she had been hunting. The charges were stacked like a house of cards designed to never fall: racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder, drug trafficking, human trafficking, corruption. Federal crimes. 40-year minimum sentence. Julian's face went white as paper. "I have money," he begged, his voice breaking. "I can pay. Whatever you want." Agent Reyes's smile was cold. "You cannot buy your way out of this one." Julian was led away in handcuffs while cameras flashed like lightning. His face was on every news channel by noon: nephew of socialite Cordelia Blackwood arrested in federal sting. Marcus Webb's destruction was quieter, more methodical. Dante did not use violence. He used something more devastating: precision. Marco and Theo spent 1 week dismantling Marcus's life piece by piece. They contacted every tenant Marcus had ever extorted and provided them with pro bono lawyers. They delivered evidence of housing code violations to city inspectors. They leaked his financial records to the IRS. Within 10 days, Marcus was under investigation for fraud, tax evasion, and racketeering. His assets were frozen. His buildings were seized. His entire empire crumbled to dust. He showed up at Dante's estate on a Tuesday afternoon, driving a rental car, his face unshaven and desperate. He collapsed on the driveway, trembling like a cornered animal, his voice shattered. "Please. I will do anything. I will leave Miami. I will disappear." Dante stood on the marble steps with Elena beside him. Noah was upstairs with Rosa, safe, protected from this ugliness. Dante's voice was quiet, almost gentle. "You threatened her. You tried to make her homeless again. You took money to hurt my family." Marcus was crying now, broken. "I did not know she mattered to you." Dante's eyes were flat, infinite. "She has always mattered." Federal marshals arrived and led Marcus away in handcuffs, screaming about lawyers and injustice. 40 years. The same sentence as his nephew. Cordelia Blackwood's destruction was social, as befits her crime. Dante leaked her involvement in Julian's schemes to every contact she possessed. Within days, she was disinvited from every charity board, every country club, every power lunch that had defined her life. Her husband divorced her and took custody of their children, citing her criminal associations. Agent Reyes arrested her as an accomplice to Julian's crimes. The arrest happened at her tennis club in front of 50 witnesses, at 4 in the afternoon with cameras rolling. Cordelia in white tennis dress, her face frozen in shock as the handcuffs caught the sunlight, turned silver. She screamed as they led her away. "I am Cordelia Blackwood. You cannot do this to me." Agent Reyes's voice was steady. "You conspired with a felon. You aided in a murder plot. You are going to federal prison for 20 years. All 3 destroyed. Not killed. Prison. Public ruin. Total annihilation. Justice, not mercy." That night, Dante found Elena in the garden. The rain had stopped. The sky was clearing, stars emerging like small fires in the darkness. He walked to her slowly, his expression unguarded in a way his men had never seen. He took her hands in his, they were still cold from the rain, and drew her close. "It is over," he said. "You are safe now." Elena looked up at him, this man who had given her everything, who had chosen her, who had burned down the world to protect her. She thought of the eviction notice with the red ink deadline. The $34. The thunderstorm. The bleeding man in an expensive suit. She thought of Noah's drawing. Of family. "I love you," she said. The words fell like rain, like relief, like the truth she had been carrying since the night she gave him her last dollar. Dante brought his forehead to hers. His voice was rough, broken, beautiful. "And I have loved you since the night you gave me your last money. Since the night you saw me bleeding and chose compassion over fear." The rain had stopped. The sky was clearing, stars emerging like small fires in the darkness. Dante walked to Elena slowly, his expression unguarded in a way his men had never seen. He took her hands in his, they were still cold from the rain, and drew her close. "It is over," he said. "You are safe now." Elena looked up at him, this man who had given her everything, who had chosen her, who had burned down the world to protect her. She thought of the eviction notice with the red ink deadline. The $34. The thunderstorm. The bleeding man in an expensive suit. She thought of Noah's drawing. Of family. "I love you," she said. The words fell like rain, like relief, like the truth she had been carrying since the night she gave him her last dollar. Dante brought his forehead to hers. His voice was rough, broken, beautiful. "And I have loved you since the night you gave me your last money. Since the night you saw me bleeding and chose compassion over fear." 3 months later, the garden had bloomed again. Elena stood at the edge of the fountain where she had almost given up, where the weight of the world had nearly crushed her into silence. That woman felt like a different person now. She had $15,000 in a savings account with her name alone on it. A car with clean leather seats. A job that paid her weekly, in cash, with respect. She was Noah's nanny, but she had become something more. Something that belonged. Dante had never crossed the line. Not once in 5 months. His hand on her shoulder when she brought him coffee. Fingers brushing when he handed her a paycheck. The way his eyes tracked her when she read to Noah before bed, sitting in the leather chair that once belonged to someone else. But the distance between them had become unbearable. Not desperate, like her old poverty. Unbearable like standing on the edge of something infinite, waiting for permission to fall. That evening, after Rosa had tucked Noah into bed, after the house had settled into the gentle breathing of sleep, Dante found her in the library. She was reading a book about Miami history, curled into the corner of the burgundy sofa. He wore a charcoal sweater, sleeves pushed to his elbows, and there was no hardness in his face. Just a man. Just a father. Just someone who had learned to exhale. "Come to my study," he said. Not a command. A question wrapped in gentleness. Elena set down the book. Her heart had begun a rhythm she could not quite name. She followed him down the hallway, past paintings that cost more than her entire childhood, into the room of dark wood and leather, bookshelves reaching toward the ceiling like prayers. He poured 2 glasses of wine. Red wine, the kind that tasted like earth and time. He handed her one and she sat in the chair across from his desk. Dante did not sit behind the desk. He sat in the chair beside her instead. Close enough that she could see the scar along his cheekbone, the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples, the faint tremor in his hands that nobody else would notice. "I need to tell you something," he said. Elena's breath caught. "Okay." Dante was silent for a long moment. The rain began outside, soft against the windows. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "When my wife died, I thought I died with her. I kept the nursery exactly as it was. I could not say my daughter's name. Minijun. He has not said it in 3 years." His voice broke on the syllables, each one a wound reopening. "I was a ghost in my own life, Elena. Walking through rooms I owned, sleeping in a bed that felt like a grave. My men followed orders because they feared me. Not because they respected me. Not because I was alive." He looked at her then. Really looked at her. "Then you gave me $34 in the rain and I saw something I had forgotten existed. Kindness without agenda. Generosity without calculation. You saw a stranger bleeding and you chose to help him. You had nothing. You were facing homelessness and you still gave me your last money." Elena set down her glass. "Dante, you do not owe me anything." "I know," he said. "That is the point." He stood and walked to the window. The rain continued, steady and deliberate. When he turned back, there was something in his eyes that had not been there before. Something alive. You rebuilt your life in 5 months, Elena. You stand as my equal now. You are not the desperate woman under the overpass anymore. You have choices. You could leave tomorrow and be fine. You have money. You have a car. You have skills. You have options now. So I am asking you to stay not because you need me, but because I need you. Elena's breath caught in her throat. I am in love with you, Dante said. The words were steady, certain as stone. I have been since the night you walked away in the rain with nothing and still smiled at a stranger. I am in love with the way you love my son. The way you stand up to people who try to diminish you. The way you chose trust over fear when the world had given you every reason to choose neither. He stepped closer. His hand reached for hers, stopped halfway. But if you do not feel the same, I will never mention it again. You can stay as Noah's nanny. Nothing has to change. I will respect that. Elena closed the distance. She took his hand. It was warm. It was real. It was everything. Everything has already changed, she said. She kissed him. It was soft, tentative, then deeper. When they broke apart, Dante was smiling, real and unguarded in a way she had never seen. Noah is going to be thrilled, he said. Elena laughed, tears on her face. He has been. For 3 months. I told him we had to wait until you were ready. Dante's thumb brushed her cheek, wiping away tears. Are you ready? Yes, she said. 6 months later, Elena stood in the garden where everything had changed. The same garden where she had almost given up. Now it held white flowers and white chairs and 200 people who had arrived in black cars with quiet respect. The ceremony was small, intimate, everything she had never imagined she deserved. Noah wore a tiny suit and carried the rings in a pillow that he held like treasure. He grinned when Dante lifted Elena's veil. Rosa cried into a handkerchief. Marco and Theo stood as witnesses, their faces showing something that had never been there before. Respect. Joy? The knowledge that their boss had chosen not power but peace. Agent Reyes attended as a guest, mentioned in passing that all 3 villains were serving their sentences. Marcus and Julian in separate federal prisons, 40 years each. Cordelia in a women's facility, 20 years. Appeals denied. The system had worked, slow and certain as it was meant to. Elena wore a simple white dress. Dante could not stop looking at her. When the officiant pronounced them married, Noah cheered louder than anyone. That night, Dante took Elena to the nursery. He had finally opened it. Together, they packed away Minute-John's things, donated them to a children's hospital. It was time. Elena held his hand the entire time. They talked about having another child someday. Maybe. When they were ready. The house felt lighter. Like something had been released and the walls could finally breathe. 6 months after the wedding, Elena sat in the private booth at Lombardi's restaurant, the place where Dante had first offered her a job. Now she sat across from him as his wife, candlelight between them, Noah coloring in the booth beside them with his tongue poking out in concentration. The maître d' greeted her by name, respectful and warm. She was no longer the homeless woman who was almost turned away. She was Mrs. Vitale. But more than that, she was herself. Strong, independent, loved. Dante reached across the table and took her hand. His fingers were warm. His ring caught the light. Do you ever think about that night? He asked. The storm. Elena smiled. Every day. You saved my life, he said. She shook her head. You saved mine. And in that moment, with Noah drawing beside them and the city lights reflecting off the window and the rain beginning again outside, Elena understood something that had taken her entire journey to learn. The person who gives their last dollar in a thunderstorm is not weak. The person who sees past power to the wounded human underneath is not naive. The person who chooses trust when the world has taught them fear is not foolish. They are brave. Every day we choose between fear and trust, between closing ourselves off and opening our hearts. Every time we help a stranger without knowing their story, we step into a mystery larger than ourselves. Elena gave her last $34 to a bleeding man in the rain. That single choice changed everything. Not because he was powerful. Because kindness creates connection. Because generosity opens doors we cannot see. If this story moved your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever helped a stranger without knowing their story? Your kindness might change a life in ways you will never know. Thank you for staying with us until the very end.